You're watching the Segpay News Network. Today, our special guest is Stanley Skoglund, CEO of Segpay UK. Hello, everybody. It's Mark Pettit here in the Segpay studio in the United States, and we have a very special guest with us on the program this week. It's Stanley Skoglund. Stanley is the CEO of Segpay UK. So, Stanley, thank you for taking the time out of your very, very busy schedule to be with us today.
Well, Mark, lovely to see you again, and it's nice to be here.
We're excited about this discussion. So, Stanley, the UK has long been an innovator when it comes to payment processing. How would you describe the payment landscaping there versus here in the United States?
Well, I think the United States still is more consolidated in terms of processing and options for merchants. I think UK, as you say, always been a hothouse for innovation. We still have a lot going on in the online space. The biggest movers now are the consolidators, in a sense, wallets. You think the Shopify's, the Google Pay, the Apple Pay, they are moving quite quickly into the e-com space. And, typically they started as something we used on our phones, right? So that's definitely a big thing in the UK right now. I think also there's a lot more choice in terms of processors. And what we as Segpay provide is that extra layer of security, compliance, knowledge about the industry. So that's our unique selling point. But I think in general, there's a lot of choice in the UK. Absolutely.
Excellent. The UK has operated independently from the European Union since Brexit. How has that change affected payment processing, Stanley?
Well, for merchants, unfortunately, payment processing has become more expensive. When the United Kingdom was still part of the European Union, we had some regulation in terms of interchange, that distribution mechanism that Visa and MasterCard use to move money from the acquiring side to the issuing side. And those fees are no longer regulated directly. Now, there has been movements by the regulator in the United Kingdom to cap these fees to align back to a level where they were before we left the European Union. So that's, I think, is a drastic change. And obviously, it has also changed things in the UK that some regulations we thought would not apply actually still applies. So I would say from a payment regulation point of view and from the regulators, so the payment system regulator or the FCA, they try to align to stay as close because Brexit was disruptive to the payment industry and disruptive to merchants, to payment providers like ourselves and banks. We can't service anyone outside of the UK. So I think it had operational impact, but it also definitely in the short term drove costs up, unfortunately. Yes.
Regulation and compliance, as you mentioned, are huge issues. What are the biggest challenges for merchants in the UK as we speak?
I think the biggest challenge today is twofold. It's divergence in regulation between the card schemes and also other alternative payment methods, figuring out what suits merchants best given what their goods services are. And I think also if we look more narrowly in our industry, so the adult, services, you have age verification. That is a huge topic, not just in the UK, but it kind of emanated from the United Kingdom. As you and the viewers may know, Ofcom drove that development. And I believe you've had someone from Ofcom on this series already. So hopefully that's something people know about. That is still a changing landscape and the regulation is being implemented. But I think that is a big concern for big players. Is this proportionate? Is this in line with, anonymity kind of worries about customer data being stored? And for smaller entities, do they have the resources to do age verification or even age assurance? What is a reasonable level? So I think this legislation, although we agree with it, we need to protect minors, we need to protect people from being exploited. It still takes time, and it will take some time, Mark, to work through all implications and also for the industry to settle on standardized solutions that are not driven by the regulators, right?
Well, it seems like you at least have uniformity when it comes to regulation versus here in the United States where it's 50 states, 50 different ways
Correct.
to proceed. That's very difficult for merchants. Is it somewhat easier in the UK with the, central
Yeah,
organization and enforcement?
it is. And that's a good point, actually. I am acutely aware of the situation in the United States, and that fragmentation is obviously driving cost big time, right? And it also, I think, deprives some of service, right? Because some providers will switch off some of the big platforms that they will switch off services in certain states because the risks are too high. And that's not really good either because it is a legal product, right, that we're dealing with here. In the United Kingdom, that uniformity, yes, it helps. But even though Brexit meant Brexit, we are close to Europe. Many of our merchants, they have UK operations, they operate also across the borders, and it isn't as uniform in Europe. So that complexity still exists in the United Kingdom, even though if you look kind of more narrowly at the United Kingdom, yes, there is one set of rules, and the regulator, luckily, is quite communicative and engaging with the marketplace. But it can be better. And I think just as things will work through in the UK, in particular, in terms of standardized solution. Remember back in the day when we kind of had the issues around theft of data, right? And it took a long time for the industry to settle with PCI and then other things, encryption of data, and you find industry solutions. We need to go the same path across this industry. In the UK, it's more standardized, as you said, but yeah, we still have work to do as an industry, I would say. And we certainly, as Segpay, we engage quite actively with regulators because we think it will serve our clients in the long term, that we give input on behalf of the industry, but we also know what solutions will be suitable, right?
Do you think, Stanley, we're going to go to more age verification, age assurance? Will we land somewhere where it's a single thing the regulators will be focused on?
So the regulation in the UK, it talks about different types of activities that we need to protect minors, or we need to protect people from suicide risk. And so it's a broad spectrum. So I think where we are here in the adult space, I think that probably is going to move more towards age verification, right? So, and I think there's a level of service, where you access services, where assurance may be adequate. But my feeling is, and I can't really tell you why, but I think the industry norm, also irrespective of regulation, the investments that people are making now, especially the big platforms setting the tone, is going to KYC. You need to know who is on your platform, both users and content providers, right? I think that's where it's going. I think that's becoming an expectation. But I don't think age verification is dead. No, I wouldn't rule it out. But I think for where the big volumes are, yes.
So, Stanley, it seems that the United States is more card-centric when it comes to payment processing, whereas the UK is different, bank-to-bank, peer-to-peer. What do you see happening in the UK, and do you think that will influence the market here in the United States?
Yes. I think, there are many threads to this question, so I'm trying to keep it simple. So Visa and MasterCard, they're both incorporated in America, and therefore they will have what I call American sensitivities in terms of what they are sensitive to from a regulatory point of view. They have a cost structure, and that's been the same for a long time. Now, with the advent of open banking, as we call it in the UK, you say pay by bank, which is a very good term too, I think becoming more adopted. It's simpler. You don't have an intermediary, right? It's simpler to make that payment. You don't have necessarily all the scheme regulations on top of it. I'm not saying that it's going to be the Wild West, it's rather the contrary, right? But that is taken off big time because in many instances, it's more cost effective. And also, you don't have to deal with so many intermediaries. It's more direct, right? I definitely think both in Europe in general, but in the United Kingdom, it's definitely going to come. And it's immensely popular for people to do their banking, for instance, utility bills, all kind of peer-to-peer. And we call it faster payments because it is fast, it is instantaneous, right? And you see it, you get a notification on your app. So for the merchants also, the settlements will be quicker. And that's important to many merchants, even in our industry. They get the payments much quicker than they do today, where we have a lot of intermediaries in between. So
you've been heavily involved in things like PCI. Merchants, do you think, Stanley, they should think of compliance as an ongoing issue, not just a one-time thing and you're done?
yeah, I mean, in that sense, Mark, I think compliance is part of your product. It's a bit what I sell. I sell payments, but I also sell assurance services. The customers who come to us to do business with us, they want us to also be the experts in what is required from them, right? And I think that's what I would look at when you sell a product. This should be part of the product. It's not an optional tag on, or as you say, a one-off exercise and you're done. It's not a tick the box, because you're handling people's money, you're handling their data, right? And they will come back to you if you tick all the boxes for them. They can make a payment when they want to make a payment, and our merchants, they receive the payments as agreed, the right amount, and they don't have to think about data security because it's part of the product we serve. So that could be tokenization, it could be encryption, it could be a number of things, how you make sure the merchant is not exposed to those compliance risks. And that, for me, is part of the product. And that, for them, should also be what's attractive about their service to a customer, right, to a consumer. People shouldn't ask that question. It should be kind of self-evident. If you do business with me, your data, your money are safe, right?
I think a lot of merchants here in the United States see the UK as a gateway to do business cross borders, common language, etc. What are some of the things that merchants should think about before making that hop across the pond?
Well, if they want to do business in the UK, they need to be incorporated in the UK. So they need, to have some kind of proportionate establishment. They need to understand how VAT, sales tax, as you call it in the United States, how that work. They need to understand, can their systems handle the formats that we use in the UK? So, for instance, if they're going to do faster payments, if they're going to do these alternative payments, will that entail certain requirements of having local bank accounts? And so, yeah, there are a number of questions that they need to think about. And by all means, we have a lot of US customers doing business out of the UK. So it's something we can help them with if they need more information about it. But yeah, there are a few things that need to think about, but they are typically to do with regulatory aspects. Using the UK as a bridgehead outside, as I told you, Brexit means we can't service, they can have a headquarters, say, in the UK and service, their branches in Europe wider. Unfortunately, with Brexit, we can service the UK market discreetly, but we can't service from the UK outside of Europe. Our subsidiary in Dublin, and I believe you've had my colleague in Dublin on your series as well.
We have. Mike Shea.
Yes, he can help with that. But I mean, the UK, I would say the case for the UK is still, it's one of the world's largest e-com markets. And if you think about consumers of the goods that we support from a payments service, it's one of the largest markets in the world. So if you are a serious actor and you want to do business, yeah, you would probably have an establishment in the United Kingdom. Yeah.
How do cross-border regulations, selling internationally and so forth, affect things like approval rates, fraud, etc.?
Well, the further away you are from the kind of customer, the more things you need to think about. So Visa and MasterCard payments, to start there, they're quite standardized, right? They're kind of low bar to entry and they're standardized. You do 3D secure and you get an authorization, so the payment is secure, and if there's something wrong, you have redress, right? If you look at local payments or alternative payments, such as, pay by bank or local schemes, that's a bit more difficult. So my advice would be, if you just do card payments, it's fairly easy and not that much to think about. It's fairly uniform. If your customers, and say you're punters, as we say in the UK, so if you are selling services in this industry and you're looking to sell that to consumers across Europe, and that your consumers would typically like to use local payment methods, that needs some consideration. You need someone who can help you consolidate those because they don't necessarily work across borders. They typically work as, like we call it, domestically, right? So say in the Netherlands, you have Ideal, you have gyro payments in Germany, and you have carte bancaire in France. They don't necessarily translate, some of them do, but there are more considerations compared, say, to Visa, MasterCard. So that's a good point, because that is the advantage of Visa, MasterCard. They are cross-border, albeit expensive.
Stanley, you've worked for and with some very big brands in the fintech world. What drew you to Segpay? Why did you agree to come to work and be the CEO of Segpay UK?
For the same reason many customers come to Segpay and stay with Segpay, and that is the CEO here in the US, Kathy Beardsley. So I've got a very soft spot for this lady, and I've known her for, I think, almost 10 years. So I've known this company from before, and I've known Kathy. So I used to, be a NED for her in a previous life, and I've helped her, build the company in different stages of her journey. And it's been an immense joy to see how she's almost single-handedly built this company with some supportive investors. So when I left a big corporate role about 3 years ago, she got wind of that. And where I am now, I know the company. It's a friendly company. It's a professional company. It's a joy to work here. It's a good way for me to pay back. And this is the right company where I can make a difference.
Well, you've been a fantastic addition. There's no doubt about it, Stanley. Now, pull out your crystal ball for us. What do you see coming in the next 3 to 5 years in the payment processing world? And how can we help our merchants navigate these waters?
I think we have touched upon some of them. I think you will find much more of these wallets that consumers interact one clicks rather than going through payment pages and filling things in, even though it's auto-populated. I think these wallets will become more and more important. I think the trends we've seen in the United Kingdom and also wider in Europe, I think the bank payments, less or fewer intermediaries, that's going to drive a lot of volumes. I think with improvements, say, in credit push payments, which have a higher degree of merchant protection, once you can add a variable element to that, that is going to drive huge migration away from card payment. So when I say variable credit push, I mean you can have repeats, recurring payment on an initial credit push payment that you authenticated, right? So as a merchant, you will have protection. Today, the debit payments where the merchant collects the payment, those are less protected, and that may be abused. You may see some merchants will experience a lot of friendly fraud on those payments. So I think once this has been standardized and this particular service is called variable credit push payment, I think that will drive, both in Europe and the United Kingdom, huge volumes over there.
And Stanley, do you think you can get us down to one password for all our devices?
Well, no, I can't help that. But I think and I'm not necessarily saying that it's going to be best for consumers and merchants to have fewer providers, where you do one click, but, it is certainly going to help. And it's certainly going to help data security, right? Fewer data details floating around in different intersections between different systems, right? So I think you will see that consolidation. But I think from a payment processing point of view, I think dominance of cards will wane. Yes, I think.
Very interesting.
And that means quicker time to settlement for our customers.
Faster, all the way to paid, right? That's what we're all about.
Exactly right.
All right, Stanley Skoglund, CEO of Segpay UK. It has been a delight having you on the program. Stanley, safe travels, and I hope to see you again in person soon.
Thank you, Mark. It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for joining us here on the Segpay News Network. We'll be back with much more great information like this in the coming weeks. Thank you.